for the next presentation. There are seats left in here in the middle as well, so you don't have to feel that you have to sit on the edge of the room. So, I'm going to stand over here. Welcome, everyone. So we've had 2 presentations already out of 5 presentations today. This is the 3rd presentation, the one before lunch. And there are some of you who have stayed here from the previous presentations, and a lot of you who are new as well. So welcome to Challenge Lab. Gabriella and Marina, they will present their master thesis right now. You've got 25, 30 minutes for your presentation. I'll let you know when 25 minutes have passed. And then we will have 10 minutes of opposition. And after those, we'll have 15 minutes of questions where the audience can ask questions. But I'm going to give the floor to you.
Yes, thank you. So, hi everyone. We're going to present our research of mapping barriers in intermodal transportation by identifying mitigation potential of digitalization for barriers in Gothenburg port logistics. We will go through the agenda for today, which is outlined here. We will start with the thesis timeline, and we'll start with the very beginning and then go to the identified challenges and to the research questions. Then we will move on to describe the methods and results for the data collection, and to make it more visible, we will decided to visualize the results after each methodology used. And then we will start with the systematic literature review, then the semi-structured interviews, where we will also tell you about the digital technologies, and then we will finish with the policy Delphi, and then we will continue with the discussion, implications, and at last the conclusion. But for the most important part, who are we, the researchers? My name is Gabriella. I have a background from nautical science, my bachelor, and now I'm finishing my maritime management master. This is Marina. She will soon continue with the presentation. She has her bachelor in biotechnology, and she's finishing her master in industrial ecology.
So we will begin with the project description. To reach the research question for our thesis, a lot of work had to be done. At the beginning of Challenge Lab, we worked with the backcasting method to design the projects we would all be working on later on. So we focused on the first 2 steps of the backcasting method. The first one involved us defining a criteria for a sustainable future, and the second step was understanding and describing a current situation and also identify gaps and challenges in the system. So with these gaps and challenges, we came up with a leverage point, which can be defined as where you can intervene in the system to create a sustainable change. And the leverage point that we have come up with was identifying barriers to intermodal transportation and port logistics and mitigate them by using digital technology to create a collaborative platform to increase efficiency regarding the insufficient connectivity of intermodal goods transportation. And it is this leverage point that gave rise to our research questions, which Gabriella will continue to talk about soon.
So, from what Marina has described, we used the output from the backcasting method to define and identify the challenge that we thought was interesting and would consequently bring value to the society. Important to highlight is that this research was underpinned by the Climate Strategy 2030, which is a regional perspective underpinned by 4 thematic areas that need improvement by reducing the climate effect on the region of West Sweden, from where we chose to focus on mobility. By the output from the 2 stages in the backcasting, we looked back at stakeholder dialogues and dialogues conducted in the first phase of this master thesis. From one of the dialogues, it was mentioned that in the port, there is a need for facilitating the right type of transport for the right type of goods. From here, we started to explore more literature regarding mobility with a port logistics perspective. where one challenge was identified as being intermodal transportation and the barriers that hindering its efficiency. From some initial interviews, we received further feedback that there actually are many barriers that hinder an efficient goods flow throughout the port, consequently hindering utilization of intermodal transportation. Moreover, digitalization was highlighted to have possible mitigation potential for existing barriers. Important to mention is that we chose to limit our research to only include goods mobility and not human mobility, since we needed to narrow down the scope to be able to conduct the research within the time frame. From the challenge identified, we came up with 2 research questions. And this is the first question. What are the barriers intermodal goods transportation faces today when trying to develop a sustainable mobility flows in the port logistics, which highlights the mapping of current barriers that hinder an efficient goods flow throughout the port to be further transported in the hinterland, which is the land segment transport from when the goods arrive in the port. And the second research question was, how can digital technology act as mitigation for existing barriers, which is underpinned by the ability of digitalization to mitigate existing barriers in relation to the research topic, which is intermodal transportation. So from the described research questions, we will now continue with why we collected the material and how.
So I will now go through the methods we used during our research and our results. These are the 3 methods we used, and by using these different data collection methods, we related to the backcasting method of step 2, which I already mentioned, which is basically understanding the current system, and in our case that was identifying the barriers that exist now. And also step 3, which is to create possible future solutions, and in our case that was application of digital technologies. So the systematic literature review, sorry, I have a wrong slide here. No, I don't, never mind. So the systematic literature review started with constructing the research questions, which we did in the very beginning of our master thesis by using the backcasting method. And then in the second step, we used the search of various databases such as Chalmers Summon and Google Scholar, and that was used to find literature. And the search words that were used were intermodal transportation, intermodal barriers, and port logistics in various forms. And the outcome was around 100,000 articles. But after specific relation to the actual research and some filtering, we ended up with only 481 only. So we had to evaluate all of these papers. And in the third step, we did so and created a list of literature that identified the barriers in the intermodal transportation, which directly related to our research. In the fourth step, after the evaluation, we ended up with 30 papers, which sounds a bit more realistic to work with. And these papers had the significant barriers related to the research regarding the intermodal transport and also port logistics. And these papers were further analyzed to extract these barriers. And then finally, all the barriers that we have identified from the relevant literature, we have assembled into an Excel sheet with an explanation, and we also put that into our appendix. So from the literature review, we have identified quite a few barriers in the intermodal transportation. But to make the results more comprehensible, we have grouped all of the key barriers into thematic groups, as you can see on this slide. So what we have found from the literature was cost and price for transport is a barrier, for instance, because costs are increasing due to higher demand of goods, larger ships and larger ports which are constantly increasing, and as well as additional movements of goods between the different transport modes. Reliability of transport faces issues because the modal shift is facing limited possibilities due to unreliable quality of transport as well as lack of capacity. Flexibility of transport is another barrier because having to move goods from one transport to another causes connectivity issues in between as well as congestion. And lack of communication is another big issue, and that results from various barriers, such as planning allocation of capacity and insufficient policy changes. Also, competition on the market puts pressure on collaboration, and that inhibits good communication. And then finally, time for transport. It's a very important factor when deciding modal choice, and actually decision makers are willing to risk loss or damage to their goods as long as the transit time is faster. And time is a barrier partially due to limited availability of appropriate management and labor. In this following method, the semi-structured interviews, to enable diversified answers, we carefully selected stakeholders that were related to our thesis. These stakeholders were people working with the transport industry and academic researchers working with intermodality in Gothenburg. And the positions of these stakeholders you can see in this slide here. So during these interviews, we asked the stakeholders about the barriers to be able to identify if the existing barriers are related to or in adherence with the barriers that we found in the literature. And then we also asked them about if there is any potential digital technologies that could help mitigate the identified barriers in order to answer our research question. So for the identified barriers from the interviews, we use the same grouping approach as for the barriers found in literature. And the main difference here you see is that instead of reliability, we have capacity, since interviews emphasize capacity to be a greater barrier for intermodal transportation. So what we found from the interviews was cost and price of transport is a barrier, for example, because costs are way too low for the trucks, which disables the use of rail, which is a far more greener solution, but it's not prioritized by the society because of poor awareness. Capacity for all intermodal transport does exist, but it's not utilized to its full potential due to lack of incentives. That's what we have found. Flexibility of transport is a barrier because of congested infrastructure, insufficient connections, and also the fact that there is an old-fashioned industry which currently needs to be replaced. Communication and business models are an issue due to manual processes and outdated business models, and thus planning and coherence with legislation are needed. And then finally, time for transport is a barrier when, for instance, there is lack of sufficient planning and booking, which is a constraint on efficient goods flow. So, the digital technologies presented here were mentioned in quite a few interviews, as well as logistic reports from DHL and PwC, which highlight the most promising options. And the digital technologies we ended up working with were Internet of Things and big data, cloud logistics, blockchain technology, sensor technology, and digital identifiers, and finally, automation technology. And when understanding the application of these technologies here, we understood that almost all of them have mitigation potential. For example, they can create collaboration platforms for various purposes, as well as they can improve efficiency and capacity in the supply chain. But to elaborate on the other possible applications and how they can mitigate existing barriers will further be discussed by Gabriella.
So this is the third step of our methods, where we did a Delphi study, or a Delphi method, which is useful when you want to reach a collective result. This was very suitable for our research, since we had various opinions and the need to analyze the results in a way that gave the research a possible outcome, whether the technologies did or did not have mitigation potential and how. We chose to use the policy Delphi, which creates a foundation for future solutions as actors or key stakeholders involved possesses expert insight in the complex problems where a collective decision is more reliable than ones from individuals. So, since we had a lot of managers and CEOs participating with their expert views, we decided it was the most appropriate approach to reach a conclusion in our research. So the policy Delphi is divided in two rounds. The first round where we did a dialogue workshop, and in the second round where we sent out a data collection form or a questionnaire. So first, in this round, as I said, we conducted a dialogue workshop, which was organized so that every stakeholder that had been previously interviewed was invited to participate, but not all could make it. So it was a very consistent group of 3 stakeholders, including us too. We had a fishbowl set up with all the stakeholders participating in a circle, as we were very few, 5 in total. So all participants were in the circle, and where Marina was a facilitator of the discussions. So Marina started with introducing the research to our participants one more time, as we had already did in the interviews. And she also gave a brief description of the digital technologies as well as the identified barriers. So later on, the participants got a paper with statements saying, I believe can mitigate barriers in front of intermodal goods transportation, where the 3 dots are, we inserted a digital technology, which we gave to the researchers, and we systematically went through the digital technology and its potential to mitigate each barrier, that thematic group barrier that we had identified. Yes. So the outcome from the dialogue workshop was a very long analysis, and the summarized table will be shown in the next slide. So we had a lot of input and feedback from those 3 stakeholders that participated, and the results, as we said, was very interesting and gave us a lot of answers regarding the digital technologies and their respective mitigation potential. After the analysis, we saw that some digital technologies had high mitigation potential, some medium, and some low. The grading related to that high potential was if the technology could fully be applied to mitigate, medium if it could partly remove the barriers, and low if it had very little or even no application at all. For blockchain technology, as you can see, I've highlighted in blue, blockchain technology was clearly decided that it did not have any applicability at present, and that automation technology, on the other hand, had massive mitigation potential due to its various autonomous operations and less reliance on labor costs. But nevertheless, after this, we continued with the second round, which was where we constructed a Delphi data collection form which was based on the previous dialogue workshops, discussions, and results from the interviews. 16 people received this data collection form, or the questionnaire, and the form was about 7 statements, and each statement had almost the same, that it could mitigate the potential barrier or the existing barriers, but there were 2 that did not cohere with the others, which were more specific and came directly from the outcome of the discussions in the dialogue workshop. And these are the 2 statements that were different from the others, and so this is an idea of how they were stated in this form, questionnaire, saying, I believe that blockchain technology cannot mitigate the barriers, price, cost, capacity, flexibility, communication, and business models, and time in front of intermodal transportation. So, and to continue with the second round, after we had received all this input from the participants in the questionnaire, we were to decide whether there was a collective agreement or disagreement, whereby we used the APMO, the average percent of majority opinions formula, which will be presented together with the results in this slide. So in total, 12 people of the 16 answered our questionnaire. So, and only 1 of the participants answered to the 2 first questions. But as always, every data input is valuable for us. So, by reflecting on the answers of each statement, we could calculate the APMO cutoff rate by using the total number of opinions, the majority of agreements, and the majority of disagreements, where majority is referred to when the consensus rate is 50% or more. Otherwise, we wouldn't consider them to have achieved consensus or not. So all that were above 84% were considered to have achieved consensus or collective agreement in this case. But however, from the questionnaire, we gained knowledge that blockchain and IoT, Internet of Things, do have future potential, but that they currently do not have any practical application due to the fact that they both are newly developed in their early stages of use. Consequently, all technologies were seen to have potential, maybe if not currently. From all the method and results given by the collection of data, we will now move on to the discussion of this research. Stop.
So, a broader perspective will be given in this discussion since we did not have enough time during this thesis to conduct a more thorough research of the exact application each digital technology can have on each specific barrier. But the barriers against intermodal transportation that we're focused on in the discussion are cost and price, capacity, and communication. So it was discussed that the increased price and cost for transport are affected by the additional movements in the intermodal transportation, since the goods need to be unloaded and loaded at the interfaces between the different transport modes. Also, it was indicated that additional costs need to be put on road transport, since at the moment it is a cheaper option in comparison to rail, but it is not the most sustainable one whatsoever. Unfortunately, actors within the transport industry tend to choose the cheapest solution rather than the greener solution. In addition, the capacity of intermodality is affected by the insufficient rail connectivity and linking of ports, which reduces the goods transport by rail to rural areas, and that results in dependence on road transport, which, as I just said, is not sustainable. It was also indicated that the rail network is not sufficiently expanded to connect all of the areas. Furthermore, the effective capacity in the port is hindered by the fact that goods owners tend to use the port terminals and warehouses as intermediate storage areas, which results in huge buildup of cargo. So hence, in addition to the bottlenecks that already do exist in the rail capacity, there will be road congestion when all the goods have to be transported. Moreover, information sharing tends to be inadequate between actors in the transport supply chain, which due to market share competition leads to withholding of information, and that hinders cooperation. And further, this research revealed that in order to improve communication, the current system needs to go back to basics while gaining an efficient information flow and providing the right type of information at the right time. However, it's indicated that communication must be established between all modes of transportation and in the whole supply chain of transport to gain an enhanced goods flow.
Yes. Nonetheless, in regard to the first research question, it was revealed that there are numerous of barriers faced to intermodal transportation. Therefore, to facilitate optimization of routes for faster transits, increase capacity for rail, reduce costs, and enable communication, digitalization is a useful mediator. The main points regarding digital technologies as mitigation was that big data, cloud logistics, and sensor technology could reduce costs, increase capacity and flexibility by providing a more efficient communication network in the interfaces between the different intermodal modes and also increase collaboration. Furthermore, predictive logistics, which is an outcome of big data, could mitigate most barriers in intermodal transportation. In addition, the results of this research confirm that sensor technology, with its linkability facilitation, that means linking of goods to a big source, for example, a ship or a rail, and digital identifiers have high mitigation potential by reducing congestion, making operations more effective, and allowing better traceability of goods. Nevertheless, the results of this research indicate that automation technology has massive mitigation potential and that it appears to be the most promising technology as long as organizations are willing to adapt to new trends and also by making the huge investments which comes along and change their current business models. So for the implications of this research, are that there are many for both practitioners, theory, as well as policymakers. Therefore, we will state those that we consider to be the most important. So implications for research or for the agencies funding research is that there is a need to put more focus of digitalization to further understand its application as an approach to mitigation of barriers against intermodal transportation. There are more implications for practitioners, but generally, the transport industry needs to take action. As in both literature and from interviews, it was positively highlighted that digitalization is an approach that can be used to encourage intermodal transportation or in operators to develop and implement new ways to increase their respective utilization of their services to the highest potential. For all intermodal transport modes, implications for future research would be to consider the underpinnings of the industry. Since it is a very conservative industry, many processes seem to be hindered, lagging behind, or even being underdeveloped. Therefore, it is imperative that practitioners understand the importance in creating an efficient and effective goods flow throughout port logistics by applying those digital technologies that have been revealed in this research. Finally, regarding the policymakers, implications from this research has been highlighted by the insufficient rail capacity in intermodal transportation, where policies need to change to facilitate sustainable transportation and faster decision-making processes. So, to conclude, our aim with this research was to identify barriers in front of intermodal transportation, while also see if there are any digital technologies that have mitigation potential, including how they possibly can mitigate those barriers. We have, by this aim, understood that there are a lot of barriers throughout the port and to the subsequent intermodal transport. And to overcome these barriers, digitalization can be utilized. The mitigation potential of digitalization for barriers are focused on investment and implementations needed to facilitate the technology attributes that can enhance effectiveness and efficiency of intermodal goods transportation. This to consequently reduce the climate impact in the region and facilitate sustainable transport options. Furthermore, emphasis need to be taken to create an efficient and collaborative transport environment where humans interact and exchange experiences. Finally, the industry will probably have a trial and error period where new digital solutions will emerge, be implemented and develop to significantly challenge the existing barriers in front of intermodal transportation. So, thank you for listening, and I hope it has been an interesting presentation.
I would also like to give an extra thanks to our amazing supervisor, Jerian, who's sitting right over here, who held her hand throughout this difficult but very fun and exciting time, and Andreas as well, who has been helping us and supporting us and guiding us into the right directions at the very beginning. So thank you, guys. And of course, John. I didn't see
you. Thank you very much. Let's move directly to the opposition. Adarsh and Georgia, you're welcome on stage. You've got your 10 minutes.
You look too excited. Yeah, I'm scared though.
Do we start?
Yes, you're welcome.
So it shows both in the presentation and in the report that you have put in a lot of effort and work. You used different methods to look at the problem from different angles, and I thought you had a very nice way, for example, of limiting the literature study that you did and tackling that in a logical manner to end up with the 30 so articles from the thousands.
Yeah.
So that was quite impressive. So with relation to that, the different methods that you used, then how do you see, how have you used the different methods to answer your research question? How do you think the three methods complement each other? And by three, I mean the interviews.
I understand. It was more of we started with doing the literature review, and then we just continued with doing the semi-structured interviews, and we use systematic combining, which means that we go back and forth between the literature and also the interviews to see and reflect on the different methods. And then we continued with the policy Delphi just so that we could know that the actual digital technologies had some sort of mitigation potential and how they could actually be. So therefore, they complement each other in that way that, from the very beginning to the end. Otherwise, we probably have had any consensus or a conclusion of our research questions.
So you use the literature search to guide your literature and data to guide your Delphi.
Yeah, we basically built
everything
on it. Yeah. So literature review was a guide for us to have the interviews because we started comparing the results of the interviews with the literature. And then we combined all of that and then we went on to the Delphi. And then the first round of Delphi helped us be able to build up on the second round. And then we also compared all of it, of course.
And the first round was based on the interviews and the literature review and the analysis of those data on those two.
So to continue it, and when I read your report, I felt that it's really well structured and it's been presented really well. A couple of questions which I had was, I saw like you mentioned a lot of times about the customer in your report. So I was a bit confused about who do you refer customer to. Is it like the individuals who import products, or is it the group, or is it the organizations who import or export large goods?
It's all of them in general. So we're talking about the transport supply chain. So basically all the customers that could possibly be in any points of that supply chain are considered because our focus was not on what exact customers it was. So it was a more generalized.
Yeah, as you said, it's the organizations that they want to buy a solution from a provider or vice versa, or the logistical customers we sometimes refer to. But generally, it's the organizations that actually buy the transport or are related to the supply chain of transport.
And you also mentioned that the customers wouldn't be ready to pay extra cost for green solution or green logistic solution. So I was just wondering if the customers would get enough information about whether the different logistic providers are sustainable enough to decide whether to opt for certain particular logistic provider. So, because there's different costs based on the kind of logistics they provide.
Yeah, from the interviews, we gained a lot of feedback that price and cost of transport is what actually matters. Whether it's sustainable or not is not the main point of why they choose a transport. It's the price and cost. And there is a lack of education what sustainability and what sustainable transport options are among customers. That was identified also during some of the interviews. So I would say that yes, there needs to be more information on what a green solution is for transport buyers, and also that maybe price, as now we have talked about the sustainable development goals and that you should have a sustainable company or working with sustainability, and therefore I think, or what we also gained from the interviews, that the customers tend to think more about the environment now than what they did before. So it's coming, but it's coming slow.
So relating a little bit to that question, you mentioned that. So you here and in the report you mentioned that that the sustainability is not an incentive, it's all about the cost. But then I'm wondering, intermodal goods transportation is a solution for the future challenges that are going to come up in terms of the increase in the goods transportation, if I understood it correctly. So as the transportation increases in the road, for example, and you get congestion, etc., the industry itself that is not willing to move into the intermodal, what is the kind of solution that they're thinking about? How would they address these issues? Did you get any feeling about that? Is that not an incentive?
One of our stakeholders talked about that there needs to be a more integrated solution from point A to point B. That companies need to work more with having a full concept of transport for the customers. Maybe that is some sort of an answer for you, but otherwise we didn't have a lot of that. It's more that digitalization also is coming more and more. So logistics forwarders, for example, freight forwarders need to pay more attention to develop themselves to actually provide everything for their customers, which are really hard, but they are trying. Something. No, I think that is the answer I can give, actually. I mean, they utilize intermodal transportation, but maybe not to the point that what they could do.
That's the last question. You mentioned in out of all the technologies, digital technologies, automation had like highest mitigation. So in comparison with the existing labor work, how do you think the cost of automation would reflect on customers and the cost of operations, the whole logistics chain?
Can you repeat the question?
I think I understand. You mean that for example, the customer who wants to buy the transport through a port, does the price or the cost of the transport reflect that? Or
like the automation requires high investment. The current system is like has labor work, which is comparatively a bit cheaper. So
exactly. So the companies that needs to make the investments, like the ports or the port terminals, they need to make these high investments. But from interviews we gain that the ports or the smaller ports or the medium ports, they don't see like what comes ahead in the future of those investments. That's why they tend to wait to see what the bigger ports do with these automation applications. Therefore, it's not so much apparent in Gothenburg today. And how it will affect customers, probably in the beginning, maybe it will affect, but I guess that's as investments, it's good, but I guess that customers pay for the transport, not for the automation in the port.
It's a long-term solution.
Exactly.
So you mentioned that automation can have a high mitigating effect towards these barriers. But is there any thought about the sustainability in that option? So it might become an environmentally more sustainable option, but what happens with, for example, the labor? Is there any thought about that within the industry?
You mean the social impact?
Yeah, so the social sustainability, for example.
You got a minute to answer that, and then.
Yeah, if I understood it correctly, I mean, of course, if you optimize the port completely, for instance, there is not going to be many manpower there, but it will eliminate a lot of mistakes and also eliminate the risks and also the harm that can come to the people working there. But in the social perspective, of course, it might be an issue since people might be losing jobs, but of course you still need people that maintain these automated gates and etc. and control it. So I don't think it could have any kind of bad social effect. It will just be different.
And it can be a good
port functions.
And it can be a good subject for further research because that we didn't include that much.
That's good.
Any concluding thoughts?
No.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Then let's go for questions from the audience. So anyone who wants to ask a question, let me know.
Is it crystal clear?
John?
Are there good examples somewhere?
For
on
automation.
this,
Yes.
no more on the intermodal systems in ports. Or are they totally free of? Do we not have any examples anywhere in the world?
You mean with automation or with intermodal?
Intermodal.
Yes, we know that in Holland or Netherlands, they have a very efficient system for inland waterways as well as road and sea. But they have many big ports also, so they have a little bit of more efficient system there. But otherwise, from that, we don't have any specific examples to give. But we know that the issue here is that we only have the rail and road option, more because the inland waterways are what we gain from interviews not very sufficiently utilized, or even there are no incentives of having these efficient automated barges, for example. Maybe research have indicated, but at the moment there are no specific good solutions for the sea part of the plan.
As we saw in the first presentation of agriculture, urban agriculture, a good talking example often changes the mind of people when they are stuck in barriers. They need to see somewhere that it actually working. So with that, but you see that it's mainly in the Netherlands that you have some few
No,
examples.
it was an example that one of the stakeholders gave that but in Netherlands they have so many barges and everything goes by sea, it's so efficient, and they also have the rail. But here in Gothenburg, we don't have the incentives from anyone to actually have a better or more utilized inland waterway system.
It could work, but it's going to take a while because there is all the capacity to make it happen. But our main focus was on everything that's stopping it from happening.
I heard that in China they also invest a lot in inland waterways.
But we didn't hear about it, but mostly from your perspective.
I was just wondering a bit, because you said that from the interviews, participants said that blockchain is not relevant. But then in the questionnaire, they do you know, why?
In the interviews, they didn't just say that, no, this will never be a solution, but as it looks presently, it doesn't have those parts that are applicable to remove the specific barriers that we identified. But if it evolves this blockchain platform, maybe in the future it will be more applicable to remove, because they have smart contracts, for example, which can be used, but it's only one small part. Maybe to pay so much money for a system for only one part is not very efficient.
Yeah, so because the barriers that we now currently need to focus on, or the whole system needs to focus on, they cannot be mitigated by the blockchain. Maybe further barriers that will arise or come later can be, when it's more about how quickly you want to make transactions or payments or sign documents, but that is not the main issue at the moment. Now it's more time and capacity, etc.
Yeah, because blockchain, if you upload something on a blockchain platform, you cannot change it or remove it. That is the problem, or as our stakeholder said, was the problem with the blockchain at the moment, that it's very stiff. And it costs a lot also to actually build a blockchain. That's why they at the present didn't see any application.
Any other questions? So in the beginning and in some of the other presentations, we've also heard the need for transforming from today's system to something else. Did the stakeholder mention anything about the need of reducing the amount of goods as a solution?
No, because because I guess that the amount of goods is actually their profit.
Yeah.
So of course they saw the amount of goods as a problem, but they saw more that they needed to make solutions to cope with the demand. Not the other way, to reduce the demand, more like have it as it is or as it's increasing, and then utilizing, for example, digitalization to actually overcome these barriers and to have an efficient system that will actually cope with the higher demand of goods or the increased demand.
That directly connects to the cost and price barrier, where I said that it's increasing because there is bigger ports and bigger ships. So they're not reducing the goods; they're just expanding the ships.
Because as a lot of stakeholders mentioned, was that the shipping industry is a very competitive industry, and the shipping companies or the shipping companies, they tend to build bigger and bigger ships, and they never stop because they want to be the leader of the shipping fleet in size. So that's why, for example, Port of Gothenburg is actually doing a fairway deepening within a lot of years, but so that the larger ships can come into the port with a lot of goods. At presently, there is ships can come in here with 20,000 containers. So, yeah, and it's watch it. It will be bigger ships.
There's a question over there.
Yeah, kind of connecting onto that. Then it seems like this is pretty locked in. Do you think that it is for some of these sustainability challenges? For example, Gabriella, what we think of the first presentation is production.
Yeah, efficiency is one of them.
I think that maybe not. Maybe the transport buyers or the customers in the end customers, need to think of what they buy, because that was also mentioned in the stakeholder interview that, for example, air freight is actually a part of intermodal transportation, but we didn't consider that because we saw it as and it was also highlighted as a very unsustainable transport option for direct transport of small packages, and we considered more container traffic, but they said that the air traffic or air freight needs to be removed, and people don't understand about this free return, free shipment, because it actually costs someone money. So I think maybe us as human beings need to rethink what we buy from where and how long it takes to get it to us. Otherwise, because the transport industry will only see, here is our profit, and they will think of their company as the sustainability perspective, not as but now we have to say to our customers that they cannot buy any goods because they won't.
Didn't DHL say that they had to throw away like a lot of
they talked about this
deliveries?
air freight from this Wish app, the China app, from where there goes a lot of air freight from China to Stockholm, Arlanda, where they have a lot of packages, and they have actually a lot of employees who actually just unpacks packages that people don't get, and they
Or
sort
don't
it
want.
or don't
Just
want
don't
because
pick
it's
up.
too cheap. So they just unpack it and they sort it so that they will not just throw it. So they recycle it actually, and that's a nightmare.
Like pens and stuff.
So it's too cheap for transporting things. So maybe it's somewhat contradictory. I don't know. He did give you an answer.
It's a bigger question.
Yeah, it's a very big question. We have to think of our own consumer behavior, maybe.
Any other questions? Anything from a supervisor perspective?
I asked a lot of questions throughout the process, and they really did very well in answering them. So I think they're
So, if there are no more questions, then I would like to say Thank you for this morning session. Thank you for your presentation. And let's go for a lunch break. And those of you who are staying to listen to the afternoon sessions, it will start 1:15 again back here. Otherwise, thank you very much.
Thank you.